evening.
Please state your name for the camera. Any name, it can be whatever you want.
My name is Andrew, and everybody called me G.
And tell me, what do you do for a living?
I'm a teacher. I teach philosophy and carpentry
In high school.
in high school, yes.
And what is your education?
I have a PhD in philosophy, and I have also bachelor in sociology.
And as I understand it, you have also been involved for a long time in the anarchist movement in Poland. Is that right?
Yes, I describe myself as an anarchist, and I participate in some initiative of anarchist movement in Poland. Yeah, we can say so.
Have you been active mostly in Warsaw?
To be honest, I used to be active in squad, which used to be, because it's no longer here in Warsaw. It's called Elba Squad. It used to be called Elba Squad, and most of my anarchist, I don't know, involvement is abroad. I would say it used to be in Greece during the migration crisis 2016, as I recall, and now I'm involved in Belarussian border crisis in Poland and now in Ukraine a little bit.
Tell me about that. Tell me about the refugee crisis
Which one?
and your involvement in it. Well, I mean, you've been involved before. The Belarusian border precedes the current one.
Yeah.
So how have you been acting in that? What has been happening there?
Okay, so long story short, from numbers of reasons, many refugees from all over the world came through Belarusian border to Poland, and they were illegal immigrants, and they were not recognized by the Polish law as a human being, we can say, and they were forced to go back to Belarus in a very brutal manner, which was illegal because of the Polish law, because of the European law, because of the human rights, and many different reasons it was illegal. So I was involved in the going to forest where those people were, and they were hiding from the police and security guards and all kinds of Polish law system, let's say, and I was helping them, providing basic basic help. I would say food, clothes, water, which was the most important one. So I spent some time in the forests looking for them and helping them survive in the winter condition in Poland.
What is happening in those forests? I hear there is some kind of forbidden zone.
Yeah, there is a war. It's called war zone, the state of emergency in this region, close to the border. So there is no go sphere for Poles and also for other nations. Only people who live there can be in those zones. So there are cities, villages over there, but you cannot enter this zone. And you cannot record. There's a state of emergency. So yeah, you cannot do a lot of stuff over there.
Let's see. And how come no one is paying much attention to this right now?
I think the main issue is the Ukrainian crisis right now. That's covered most of the story because it's bigger, and the Polish government approach is completely different, which is basically racist because those people who are on the Belarusian border in Polish forest are also victim of war, but different one, and they are not white. So that's the basically it's a racist distinction between people who we help and people who are thrown to forest to go back when they came from. But yeah, I think that's that's the main issue, that Poles are not now focused on Ukrainian war, which is of course shameful and disastrous.
Let's talk a little bit before we go to the war. Let's talk a little bit more about this. Like there has been um, a bit of discourse, admittedly, like this did not go unnoticed.
Mm-hmm.
That there is a tendency, there is a unprecedented acceptance of the Ukrainian refugees of this war,
Mm-hmm.
which is, admittedly a very good thing,
Sure.
with some rather disturbing remarks along the way, like officials, from people from random journalists to even Ukraine officials
Mm-hmm.
have made statements such as like, these people, they are white and blonde with blue eyes, they are like us, and things like this. In Greece also, many right-wing politicians say these are the real refugees, not like these other coming from the Middle East and so on. What can you tell me about this? This is a growingly disturbing aspect of this unraveling situation.
It's racist distinction for sure, and what can I say? There are plenty of things to unpack over here. First of all, there's the color of your skin, which is obvious, which is just racist distinction. The second thing is the Polish Russophobia, which we are taught in school to hate Russians. So if the Putin is inviting anyone, we will help. And somehow it works, because during the Chechenian war, Poles invite to Poland a lot of Chechenian, which are Muslim, which is interesting, and they are not completely white. It's completely different culture, but they were fighting with Putin. So there's this aspect of that. But on the other hand, we can say that Poles see this war very close to, because it's close to our border. So I'm not first to throw stones to Polish hospitality right now, which is huge and it's remarkable and really it's something. So maybe I would like this scenario and this narrative to be true, that Poles are helping refugees because they are seeing this war and they want to act. But for sure there are many reasons for that, and Russophobia and racism is one of them.
Okay, just a small follow-up and we can move on. Okay, I appreciate the take on the Polish side of the narrative, but this is now kind of discussed as something concerning Europe at large,
Mm-hmm.
like how Europe as a whole
Mm-hmm.
is kind of making a very stark distinction between these particular refugees
Mm-hmm.
and anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard about this? There was even an article in The Guardian about it, in terms of the coverage as well, in various different countries of Europe,
Sure.
how that reflects in the media coverage. Have you seen this? Do you have some thoughts on this?
I see it every day, because a lot of my friends who are not involved in the Belarusian crisis or any other crisis with no white refugees, they were not involved in those, and now they're very involved and they're doing a great job helping Ukrainians. So yeah, it's all over the Poland right now that we will help only this specific group of people. So as I said, that's a lot of things inside. So Russophobia and racist, which is, you don't need to be a racist like per se and be a huge fan of some racist theories to just help those people, because they're more similar and they are close to our border, and there are many Ukrainians in Poland. They are working with us, we know them, so we are not afraid of them as much as those Muslims from Middle East, and they want to make a Sharia over here or some other completely nonsense stuff. So this anti-Muslim narration, which is taught in school since the 9/11, so plenty of years right now, that Muslim equals terrorist, it's working right now, and that's the outcome. So we choose to help only those Orthodox Christian Ukrainians, which are more similar than us, which is sad. Yeah.
How can you compare at all, or make any have any thoughts, any reflection on your experience in Greece with refugee issue, the refugee crisis in Greece, and the your experience at the Belarusian border?
I would say that there's a huge difference, which I noticed, that people in Poland, even those who were involved in Belarusian crisis, so helping mostly Muslims and no white people, there were plenty of people helping. Undercover, not talking about it, but there was a huge movement, underground movement, like regular people, not anarchists, not communists, not leftists, not liberals, even Catholics, old ladies making pierogis for some refugees and invite them to home. That was amazing, and I didn't notice it in Greece. Probably it was there, but because I'm unfortunate, I don't speak Greek, so it was hard to catch. But even before the war, I was shocked how many people are helping. Like, that's, even if we have this narration from media, from government, and all over, the Muslim equals terrorist, we saw that if some hungry people knock to door, and this door will open, and that was amazing. Like, I was shocked how many people, regular people, not involved in any actions, organization, NGOs, parties, or any other really regular people were doing 99 of the job, and those leftist or anarchist activists were 1% of help which was provided, and that was amazing. And now in the Ukrainian war we see the similar situation, like regular people are helping because government is doing a lot of fuzz in media, but they're not providing any help. Like 99% of help which is provided to Ukrainians is provided by regular people who are hosting in the home. So we don't have refugees camps. We have them, which are provided for non-white and for Muslims, which are provided by our government. But it's completely different approach. Not by the government also, because they are doing this separation, of course, for Ukrainians and other refugees. But this whole movement, which is now growing, and we can see it in the media, is made by regular people who have any subsidies, any help from government, and they're doing their best, which is great. So yeah.
Before we move on, just a clarification for the record that your experience in Greece was not in the islands, not in Lesbos or Chios or Samos or anything. It was in Idomeni, right?
It was. I spent sometimes. I was twice in Idomeni. First time for a couple of hours. Just we were on the trip to make a movie about refugees, and after this experience, I decided to go back with my friend, and who is also involved in the Belarusian crisis right now, and Ukrainian one. So yeah, and then I decided to go strictly to Idomeni to focus on provide some help over there.
So the shift of focus now turns to the Ukrainian border and the crisis there.
Yes.
And the vast number of refugees because of this war. Why is this war happening?
That's a great question. I would like to know the answer. I think, and it's not, I don't have any papers for that. I think that Putin, per se, this strict one person in this whole world, decided to be remembered as a great president, as a great leader, and that's it. That's his ego, which is doing all these terrible things.
What about the geopolitical approaches to the causes and the effect of this war?
What do you mean?
Okay, obviously the Russian narrative is, let's take the Russian narrative at first. So it's about denazification
Mm-hmm.
and the threat of NATO.
Yes.
Yes, and about the protection of the Russian-speaking and ethnically Russian people who were suffering from genocide.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So how do you receive this narrative about the invasion? That is like the motivation for this invasion.
I think they're completely false in this to the level of the reason to start the war. For sure, there were some Nazi groups, which we know about in Ukrainian, but there are also in Poland. We have some right-wing organizations which are completely Nazi, and there are Nazi organizations in Greece. All over the world, there are Nazi organizations. I'm not sure it's the reason to attack another country and make a genocide because of that and occupy the country. I'm not sure this narration about denazification in the mouth of Putin, it can be true, because what do you call Nazi? Nazi is the person who is racist. Okay, that's one of the part of it, who's killing people because of his stuff and he's doing some genocides. That's also true. But Putin is more to Nazi party right now, and this military movement and being strong and this all discourse about being a Nazi as a soldier who need to be tough. That's one part of this narration also, as we know from Tevelite or some other books. So Nazi is a very broad word and can be interpreted in many cases. For sure, there were some white supremacists in Ukrainian, but still, it's not the reason to start the war and kill civilians. So that I think it's completely false, and Putin is using it as an excuse, because in Russia, in all Eastern European countries, this huge myth about fighting the Hitler during the Second World War is a huge and powerful myth. It's true, because as we know, Stalin won the battle, and Red Army occupied Berlin. Great for them. I'm very glad for that. But it's no longer true, and it cannot be a reason to attack another country. So that's the thing about the Nazis. He's using the national myth about wojna ojczyźniana, which means the national war, because in Russia you are not saying the Second World War, you are saying wojna ojczyźniana, which means nationality war, which everybody was involved, and that's true. That's also true. But this myth was true 60 or more years ago, and now I think it's just cynically used. About the genocide of the Russian-speaking people in Ukraine.
Before we go to that,
yeah,
let's
sure.
take it one at a time. Let me. No, I will not cut it. I'm just going to come have something.
Sure.
A bit more on that. So, I guess part of this narrative, and now we go beyond what is coming just from the Russian state, but also from people who are susceptible to this narrative throughout the world and in the West as well. So they are saying that the particularity of the Ukrainian situation is that Nazis were embedded within the state structures, that they were decorated in the parliament and so on. To what extent this is true, and does it change anything?
I do not know if it's true. It can be true, but still, it's not a reason to invade the country. Like, there are right-wing organizations, there are right-wing government in European Union, but still, it's not the reason to invade the country. Like, I can imagine. I live in Poland. Come on, I have a right-wing government since I remember, and they're hardcore right-wing. And they're doing nasty stuff. but still, it's not the reason to throw bombs to Warsaw. And they are decorated, and they have medals, and they work in government. People who can easily called Nazis, and I will not have a huge problem to call them Nazi. But still, it's far away to genocide, long way to genocide.
And so, once again, um, what do you think is the truth and the purpose of the narrative about the Russian-speaking genocide,
Mm-hmm.
Russian-speaking people genocide in Donbass?
Sure. So I think it's an excuse. I assume it's false. I cannot see the Ukrainian president who is trying to go to the European Union and doing genocide on the side and trying to cover it up. It sounds too strange, but it sounds like a great excuse to invade Ukraine. The same narrative was used when the Poland was invaded during the Second World War by Stalin, because they came to Poland to protect Russian-speaking citizens. The same narrative is used by Chinese government occupying Tibet, and in every case when someone is trying to attack another country, it's very easy excuse to use, and I think in this case it's false, and that's it. Yeah.
Along the same lines, there is a narrative that precedes these events, which is about Maidan itself, the
Mhm.
Maidan uprising itself. So this is portrayed by a section of the left as a kind of orange, so-called orange
Mhm.
revolution
Yes.
that was orchestrated by the CIA and so on, like in an attempt
Mm-hmm.
to overthrow the legally elected and so on, like pro-Russian government
Yeah.
of Viktor Yanukovych.
Yeah.
What do you think happened there? Like, what's the reality of the situation?
It's a tough question. First of all, I think the CIA and other organization like that were involved there because they are involved in this kind of huge stuff, events, this huge events. So yeah, they were there for sure. But it doesn't change anything, or not completely, because for sure, Ukrainians, maybe not most of them, but a lot of people in Ukrainian for sure want to go to European Union, and they want to be a part of European world, not completely Russian world. So, it's really hard to be convinced by anyone that CIA did it, and it's all NATO and imperialistic American fairy tale to overthrow Yanukovych. So for sure there are some Ukrainians who prefer to be in Russia. Now I'm not sure about it how many, but during the Maidan for sure there were some.
Is there a geographical distinction
There
in
is-
who prefers to be in European Union?
There
who
is
prefers
a
to be close to
distinction. Eastern part of Ukraine prefer to be Russian, Western prefer to be European. But I think it's not completely true because it's too easy to say. And there was a huge essay about there are two Ukrainians. That was the title of that, and the response to this essay was there's like 99 thousands of Ukrainians. So every region have its special approach to this problem, and I think because we are living in capitalistic world right now, sorry to say, but that's the reality, and economy of Russia is not the best, and they are not developed country very much, and they're not helping people to get rich, and people in general prefer to get rich, not the left wing activists, but most of the Ukrainians prefer to be in Germany and be a country like in Germany. So because European Union narration is that go to Europe, go be a member of European Union, then you will get rich, you will buy a new car, and so on and so on. I think that they prefer to be in Europe. That's it.
Do you see any correlation with this narrative about Maidan and what is happening now in Ukraine, but um, particularly about the uprising in Maidan, with the other so-called orange revolutions? Like, wasn't there a similar narrative about the Syrian uprising or the uprising in Tahrir, in Libya, you know, and so on? Do you see what kind of correlation do you see there?
It's a great question. Um, I hope so, that people decided to overthrow the dictatorships in general, which is great. And one uprising is helping another uprising. But, of course, the CIA and NATO and all those organizations were involved somehow. But still, this idea of freedom, which is of course specific, because the understanding of freedom is capitalism and democracy. But we know from maybe a European perspective that it's not so easy, and this democracy and this capitalism is not working very well, and there are many issues with that. But this all uprising, I think it was like huge movement of people who decided to fight for the freedom, which is great, and it ended up very, very bad. But yeah, so the Tahrir demonstration was a big thing to me. I was reading Agamben about it, so it was beautiful that people were trying to change the world that they are living in. Yeah, nice dream.
So you mentioned NATO. Obviously, in terms of the leftist approach to this, there is a section of the left that is pointing out that, if anything, this is more the fault of NATO. There is a famous also like YouTube video of an American academic who is kind of explaining that how like NATO's expansion pressured Russia to the point of instigating this. What do you see in this approach?
I'm not a huge fan of NATO, for sure. But if I need to choose between Russia and NATO, I prefer NATO. And I know it's not a good choice, because I know that NATO was involved in nasty stuff, doing wars and occupying countries, and Iraq, Afghanistan. Yeah, there are shameful things. But still, I think the Russia is no different. So there is, in this specific war in Ukraine, I think that this narration that Russia was forced to bomb schools because they were forced by NATO to defend themselves is stupid, to be honest. It's just stupid, and it's untrue, because of course NATO wants to expand. Of course NATO wants to invade another countries and make this imperialistic occupations of many countries. But still, what is doing Russia right now? It's not the defending themselves from NATO. Yeah, I see it this way, I think.
I get from you that you say these are both two like equally dangerous imperialist poles.
Yeah.
But I sense that somehow you're more afraid of Russia than you are of NATO. Why do you think
why
that
not?
is?
That's my Russophobia. No, I hope no. Somehow I think that because we have some, I don't know, I was trying to say that because we have some legal courts and we can shoot the people who are doing bad stuff is helping us and it's an advantage, but it's completely untrue if we are talking about Iraq or Afghanistan. Mm. So from anarchist perspective, it's hard to defend the NATO, for sure, but hmm. I think NATO is more predictable. So maybe I'm not so much afraid of them. Yeah, that's
And a little follow up on that. Uh, Somehow, in regards to this question in particular and to the overall situation,
mhm.
there seems to be a distinct difference of perspectives from anarchists and leftists, and overall the majorities of the majority of the population
Mhm.
in most of Eastern Europe, in places like and above and beyond, like in places like Finland, Poland, Estonia, the Baltic nations,
Mhm.
in Kazakhstan.
Mhm.
The narratives we get, as particularly for anarchists, from anarchists, let's say, they have a distinctively different point of view
Mhm.
that looks at even NATO a little bit differently. Why is that?
I think they can be. I'm not sure about that. I'm not in touch with Finland anarchists or Kazakhstan anarchists, but I assume that they're afraid of invasion. I think that would be the reason. Yeah.
So there is some kind of case to be made here that Russian imperialism is a more imminent threat. Is something much more close to home, as is their own imperialism, and NATO is something further away that can provide protection from that.
Probably you're right here, and maybe there's another reason. And we will jump back to your previous question. That even if NATO is doing something which, from anarchist perspective, is shameful or is wrong, somehow they know that, and somehow we can appeal to a court of justice, and we can point out that it was wrong. And in the Russian case, they don't care. Like even NATO in Syria war or in Afghan war, they were trying to cover up mass murder because they knew that it's wrong and they can be suited. So they were a little bit afraid of that. And I think in Russia they are not afraid, so they can do it without gloves. So I think there's a small difference, but it's significant. Um, yeah, and if yeah, that's it. Like I think that's the distinction that they are doing. They know that they are doing wrong, and somehow in many years they can be suited, and the majority of Europeans do not approve bombing hospitals, and for sure in Russia also, but the government do not care because the Russians cannot do anything about Putin's decisions, and in Europe we can change the government, for example. So, yeah.
How would you describe in Poland? Let's stick to Poland, which is you have a better understanding of. How would you describe the reception and of the anarchists and leftists of the war and the mobilization towards it? Would you say the vast majority of Polish anarchists?
I was thinking a lot about it, so I have some thoughts. The first thing is that majority of activists, maybe not majority, but a significant part of activists which I met during Belarusian crisis or Ukrainian crisis are anarchists. So they are there, which is great. So there are Catholics, liberals, leftists, and anarchists are there. People all over the Poland. But from which is interesting for me, that those groups which I know in Poland, they are not working as the groups, like from squads, for example. That I know that this group is doing something in the border, and this is from this squad specifically. Those people. No, it's not working this way. That people from different collectives and different groups are just meeting there, and they're making a new group, which is interesting. Why we are so weak as an anarchist movement, that we cannot just move our collectives or our groups as a whole and do some part of help or some job which is needed right now at the borders. But yeah, somehow the anarchists are there, but not as a collectives or the groups, which they are in everyday life, but the singularities, which is interesting, and I think it's showing the weakness of the anarchist movement. But
I see, but yet though there is a large mobilization.
oh yeah,
however.
definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, there's a large mobilization in regards to the to the refugee crisis.
Yeah.
And so on. Is there also does this mobilization extend all the way to people going to fight in Kiev and other places?
Yeah, I heard about this case. Yeah, that people somehow connected went, but I don't know the details, and I do not know. I do not know. I do not want to know.
Overall, would you say that the vast majority of Polish anarchists and Polish leftists,
Mhm.
for that matter, are starkly against the Russian invasion and are not susceptible to the arguments about NATO and so on?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, I think most of the anarchists are somehow involved in this crisis, helping refugees for sure. I'm not sure that they are debating the NATO situation, but for sure they're helping. Somehow they're involved. Yeah, that's the spirit right now.
So as a last question to you, I will say, given what we have already said, given our discussion and the general issues,
Mm-hmm.
what do you have to add? What do you want to say about all of this? So, an open question.
Open question. The hardest one. Maybe one thing that from anarchistic bubble, I was shocked how many regular people are helping refugees, and this rhetoric which we are fed up with from government, from media, and so on about the refugees, and I'm talking about the refugees from the Middle East. It's not working, and somehow it's amazing how many regular people are, when they are forced to see the human being which is in need of help, of food, of warmth, of shelter, how many of them respond. And somehow I think that anarchist movement forgot about it in Poland specifically. Like, we are really in the bubble of anarchist hell. Small groups, to say at least. And yeah, so that's my impression after being in those borders. Like, we see it now in Ukrainian, but as we said, as we talked, we see plenty of reason to help Ukrainian refugees. But even though this movement in Poland is huge to help Ukrainian refugees, and it's amazing and it's great, and I'm very happy of that. But even though this helping the non-white refugees in Belarusian border, which is illegal. You can be prosecuted, you can go to jail, and so on. And even though people are helping, even if they are Catholics and hardcore Catholics, and it's amazing. And I never saw such huge groups involved in helping people, which was illegal in Belarusian border, anywhere in the history of European movements at all. That's really interesting, because for sure the refugee crisis, we saw it in Italy, we saw it in Greece, we saw it all over the world, Spain, but I never saw, or maybe I was not looking enough, that can be also be true, but I never saw so huge underground movement, which is amazing, and it's not provided by anarchists or leftists. So that's interesting thing, and I'm not saying that the Poles are special or something like that. It's not that. I'm far away from patriotical thinking, or to put the Poles on the pedestal or something like that. But the question maybe is why it worked so well, how it works so well. Like, what's the difference? Like, why in Italy it's not so common? And there are many answers to this question. Maybe it was sudden and only for a short period of time. And in Greece and in Italy, it's from years and years. So I don't know, but I'm shocked. Yeah. So maybe that's the my question to you.
Well, I'll try to answer it as my reportage unfolds,
Great.
perhaps. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.